The Texans fall to the Bears in their first preseason game, but who cares? Let's talk about what we got from that game. We're going to talk about all that and more on this edition of The Bullpen.
He floats one wide open, and there he goes. Tagged down for a Texan touchdown.
Hello and welcome to The Bullpen. I'm James Roy, and with me, as always, is my co-host Tom Chavarria. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm good. We have actually seen a football game of the new season. Can't wait to get to the next one. Saw a lot of good things. Curious what your thoughts are.
I mean, a 2.5 quarters of football, it feels like an Anthony Richardson performance. It's just 2.5 quarters, and that's all we got. But I mean, I think we got all we needed to. As Big Star just been saying a lot, I heard him on Locked On Texans. We got robbed of the Tim Boyle show. That's really what we got robbed of. And so I liked what we saw. I think it highlighted some things. I want to know from you, what, just right off the cuff, what was your biggest takeaway overall from this game?
Honestly, the biggest takeaway was for me, the wide receiver, I guess, I don't know if you want to call it a show. I don't know if you want to call it kind of like what we didn't see. I really felt like when the starters were announced that they weren't going to play, I thought this was going to be the John Mechie show. And instead, we got the Xavier Hutchinson show. And I don't know what to make of it. Yeah,
I agree. I think that the general narrative online has been casting more doubt than there was going into the game on John Mechie's roster position. Guys like Cody Stutes had been talking about it all offseason, how Xavier Hutchinson looked a lot better and certainly deserves a roster spot on this team. I don't know if I think that John Mechie's in jeopardy being cut. I think a lot of people are viewing this through the lens of a team that's keeping only 6 wide receivers. Another name that Cody Stutes brought up was Ben Skoranek, who also had a pretty good game. I don't think the Hall of Fame game is going to make the decision on which wide receivers stay, but I think that the narrative has shifted. But I also think a lot of people, like I said, 6 wide receivers. I'm thinking 7 probably for this team. And so with that in mind, I don't think it's impossible for Mechie, Skoranek, and Hutchinson to make the team. It's just a matter of how attached the Texans are to Robert Woods. And then I think Noah Brown at this point, Noah Brown and the big 3 are my locks for the Texans, wide receiver room at this point. But we'll see how they view it. Like I said, to be a fly on the wall inside the Texans facilities when they have their conversations about Robert Woods, I feel like if you have only lived on Twitter this offseason, you probably think the Texans hate him and that they're going to get rid of him. Just based off how the fans talk about him. But I don't think it's that simple. And I don't think we really, as is the case a lot of times, Nick and D'Amico have done a very good job of not really talking about that. So we don't really have anything to go on there. For me personally, I think the big thing that's just generally not even a specific position, just across the board, that stuck out to me was was how good the depth is and how bad the depth is at some positions. It seemed like the 2s in general were serviceable, and the game was more interesting when they were in. And as we got deeper into the roster in general, the performance fell off. But specifically at positions like linebacker, the players that played in this game didn't exactly stand out in a way that gives me, which, I mean, I've been pushing the narrative all offseason that the linebacking depth for the Texans is almost non-existent. There's this thought that maybe Jacob Phillips could be like the next Blake Cashman, could come in on a 1-year deal and really show out. That's yet to be seen. But to me, that's kind of what showed up. And I'd like to hear what you think about it. Do you think that maybe there's too much to be made of the depth and how they performed in the Hall of Fame game against other depth? Or are you seeing what I'm talking about?
So initially, I watched this game and I kind of felt like, man, the players that I expected to shine didn't necessarily shine. And then the more I watched the game, the deeper I got into it, I felt like it spoke more to what Bobby Slowick's just really trying to do with the offense in general. And I speak mainly to the offense because I don't know that we're going to be able to talk about the defense in the same vein, because there is a chasm, I think, on defense from ones and twos to anything else. Where the offense, I feel, can go so much deeper. We saw it at running back. We saw it at wide receiver. I think we have it up until Tegan Quitoriano got hurt. I thought we had it at tight end too. It was just like so many weapons galore everywhere. So for me, I think it really spoke to the way Bobby Slowick is handling his business as a coordinator. Like, I'm going to take advantage of matchups. I'm going to find the best position, and I'm not going to concern myself with the name on the back of the jersey. And that's what I took away from it in regards to John Mechie, because I feel like if this was something where they were trying to force feed him the ball, they would have done that, and he didn't have the target share that I thought he was going to have.
Yeah, I don't think they were really trying to force the ball to John Mechie either. And I think it's more about, like you said, it's not the name on the back of the jersey. Slowick's just going to get the ball to wherever works. And then to speak to that point, one of the things we talked about this offseason with the Ben Skoranek signing was his usage out of the backfield and as like a tight end. And there was a few plays where I saw him set up to receive the ball in that way. And, he wasn't looked at, or there was that one play where Davis Mills overthrew him because he waited too long to find him on the check down. But seeing that, it doesn't matter. Like, the scheme is designed to give the quarterback, it's a quarterback friendly scheme, and it's designed to give the quarterback the option to find who he wants. And I think Davis Mills looked really good in the scheme. Which brings up my next question. We'll go down the line on offense and defense. We'll start at quarterback at the top. Davis Mills' performance is too much being made of it. Do you think that it's a product of Bobby Slowick's scheme being quarterback friendly? And how do you feel about the long-term prospects of Davis Mills as the Texans' backup quarterback?
I think that entirely depends on the rest of the league. I really feel like if Nick Caserio got a phone call and got an offer he couldn't refuse for Davis Mills, who clearly is going to be a backup while as a Houston Texan, he might entertain it. Where before, I think the him being in the system and that being such a vital position in case something was to happen to CJ, now he's almost played himself out of a backup role. There's going to be teams that are looking for a guy that can start because someone gets hurt, i.e. Justin Herbert, or I think Geno Smith has an injury he's dealing with. There's guys around the league that if they go down, their backups aren't as good as Davis Mills. And there might be a team out there that says, all right, we need to go get that guy because I know he's not going to start, where we could start him.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, here's another question. A lot of the discussion around Mills in that situation that you described centers around what the minimum payment is from another team to get him in terms of draft picks. Now, Davis Mills, a third-round draft pick in the 2021 NFL draft. Some people are saying that they wouldn't move him for any less than a third-round pick. Do you think that's too large of an ask? And what is your minimum capital that you would want to get in return if it was decided that Davis Mills was the backup quarterback to be traded?
I feel like a third round pick is probably where Nick Caserio is going to line in the sand. Like, he cost me nothing to be the best possible backup for my system that I can get. Like, obviously Case Keenum being the ultra veteran, could come in and start a game. Do you want Case Keenum to do too much? Probably not. Now how well Davis Mills looked, maybe he unseats Case. But to me, I think if they need somebody to start one game a la last year, you're going to get Case Keenum just because he's had more time under center. Obviously, now you can say he's got some familiarity with some of the new guys like Stephon Diggs. So it's just going to be interesting to see what they do there. Teams that are in desperate need will have to pay probably a premium that you probably wouldn't normally get for a guy like Davis Mills. Davis Mills should probably only net you a 4th or 5th round pick at a minimum, because somebody's going to have to pay him soon too. And that's probably going to drive the value down as well, right? Like, how much do you pay a backup guy that's like a fringe guy? I mean, we saw Marcus Mariota get a pretty hefty check, and that was to be a backup. And do you really want to do that? I don't know. So for me, it's all going to be Nick in the driver's seat, which I love, because obviously when he's got an opportunity to take advantage of some of these other teams, he's done a really good job of doing it.
100%. I mean, I think that Davis Mills, I've spoken to this before, the fatigue Texans fans have, if there's like two or three things that really set them off, give us PTSD, it's going to be the term culture, Davis Mills, and like any coach that coached the team for the years prior to DeMeco Ryans arriving. It's just like, Oh no. Do I have to watch David Culley's offense trot onto the field again? Like, what are we doing? So in that regard, I think Mills gets a lot of unnecessary hate. There's some people that are like, oh, we could trade him right now. I think the luxury of having a backup quarterback at the level of Mills is something it's slept on by a lot of people, especially within the fan base. I posed the question on Twitter. I think it's an out there question. I kind of thought it was dumb to ask it. But when you compare these situations, I think there's some merit to the comparison. When we look at the Texans in 2011, first playoff appearance, Matt Schaub goes down. They're 9-4. They were playing against the Buccaneers, breaks his Linsfranc. They stumble through the rest of the season and they get into the playoffs. And then TJ Yates is their quarterback. We can argue that in that Ravens game, the 4 interceptions that he threw were probably the difference between winning that game and not winning it. When you have a team that's that good, the difference between excellent quarterback play, serviceable quarterback play, and less than average quarterback play is huge. I would say that TJ Yates probably falls in the less than average. At points he was serviceable, but for the most part, less than average. And so if you would label Davis Mills as maybe just below a Matt Schaub, like just below, like if Davis Mills is on that roster, he's not starting over Matt Schaub, but he is like a lot closer to Matt Schaub, and Matt Schaub goes down. Do you think that Davis Mills gives the Texans a significantly better chance in 2011 of advancing past the Ravens in the playoffs? That's like saying, do you think that Michael Jordan would beat LeBron James one-on-one? We're not going to get that. Like, it's not going to happen. But all these, sports fans, me especially, hypotheticals are what we live on. So, I mean, I don't pose the question to get an answer. It's more of a rhetorical question. But just having that thought in my head makes me think that Davis Mills is definitely worth keeping on the roster, unless I'll say a third round pick comes around. It's hard not to move on from him. What you got from Case Keenum last year against the Titans and against the Browns, that's backup quarterback level play. That's like not less than what you would have expected from him. So I have no problem with carrying Case Keenum as the backup and maybe drafting another backup in the next draft or signing a journeyman to play backup in the following years. But that being said, the next position on offense to look at is running back. They started with Dario Gambawale. They worked through the room. What are your thoughts on the Texans running back room? The big thing has been depth, and with the addition of Cam Akers, there was more questions as to who was going to make the roster. I was surprised that we got to see J.J. Taylor before we saw Cam Akers and before we saw Jawar Jordan. But what are your thoughts on the running back depth after the Hall of Fame game?
It was really intriguing. Like you said, the names that came out weren't the names that everybody kind of expected. I think Dare is a guy that you've obviously seen on this team and in this offense in the past. So I didn't see the reason to run him when you had guys that clearly needed to get the reps, clearly needed to get the terminology, that sort of thing. And you saw a little bit of that preseason stuff where I think there was a handoff where, and I don't know if that was a Davis thing or if that was a running back thing where he turned around, the guy was not there. So then he takes a dive or whatever. And that's the sort of stuff you're trying to work through with guys that haven't been in the system. So I was really interested to see that Dare got so much run. But yeah, I mean, I think initially a lot of people loved the Jawar Jordan draft pick. And I don't know that anyone ever heard anything different to say, this guy's going to be the next, the RB2 or this guy, I mean, we thought he could, but now seeing the way the depth rolled out, I don't know that he makes the roster. And that's crazy to me, like considering they just drafted him, but I mean, when you saw Taylor and then you saw Cam and how good Cam looked, Cam makes this thing a totally different discussion because that's the versatility that you love out of Joe Mixon. You're getting it at RB3, maybe RB2. I don't know what the ceiling is for him, but he had a really impressive day.
Yeah, and you spoke to it with Cam Akers and him, making the roster or him getting signed. You spoke to it a couple of weeks ago about how if the Texans had signed Cam Akers before Jawar Jordan was drafted, I don't know if a lot of people would have cared that Jawar Jordan was drafted. And so when we look at the usage, I had spoken to the fact that Cam Akers might not make the roster and he would have to show something. I think a lot of people are making a lot of his Achilles injuries And I'll say this. I'm going to make it an Astros analogy. You can tell me if I'm wrong or not. Obviously, with the recent announcement that Lance McCullers is not pitching this season, which, shocker that he's not going to pitch this season. I'm going to make a comparison to Lance. So Cam Akers, as a starting running back, injury prone, eventually gets torn up, has both of his Achilles go. And it's questions of, okay, he's good, but is he still the same guy? Cam Akers as a third string running back, is he going to see the field enough for us to be concerned about his injury proneness? Probably not. Is he going to contribute? Maybe not to the same level, but like he's probably serviceable as an RB3. That's like a really good three-headed monster. Pierce, Akers, and Joe Mixon. I would pair it to the people that were talking about sending Lance McCullers to the bullpen. You know, as a starter, he's getting so many innings that he is bound to get injured. He's injury prone and just ends up spending a lot of time out. But if Lance McCullers goes to the bullpen, obviously if he ever pitches again, it's now the question here. But if Lance McCullers goes to the bullpen, he's getting less usage. He's still a good pitcher. He can still throw the ball. He's just doing it less, which means that he has more longevity and can work on being a high leverage guy. I don't know if the comparison really makes any sense, but like that's what I think of after seeing Cam Akers come in, is that like, yeah, Cam Akers could come in on a third down and like really light it up and then go to the sideline and take a break. Maybe see like at most 5 to 10 plays and just really try and make his mark, and he's capable of it. He's got the talent. He's just not, durable enough to see the field more than that. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
It's an interesting analogy. It's really like, it's really apples to oranges, kinda. I mean, one, we're talking about Lance and his elbow and whether or not or what, and that would be like, for example, that would be like two Tommy Johns back to back. When you think of both Achilles blown, I mean, one is normally really, really hard to come back from. A second one,
yeah.
I mean, that's both your wheels.
Yeah.
So, and then the big thing with it too is like, you're not paying Cam to be an RB1. You're paying Lance to be a starting pitcher. To put him in the bullpen, it's like totally different because $17 million relievers don't exist. Closers do, starters do.
Yeah.
Relievers don't. So, I mean, this is where the Texans clearly are doing it right versus the Astros. When you think about how much they're paying for guys that aren't playing. But I mean, I love the idea of Cam being able to just be a guy that when called upon can be very, very good. And his injury stuff and his money stuff, if Cam Akers doesn't make it through the season, you're not going to miss the 1.25 or whatever he signed for. You're going to be like, we rolled the dice. It was a lottery ticket. Didn't work out. Right now, Astros Nation is losing their minds because they're down a ton of pitching. And this dude was supposed to be back by now, and he's done for the season again. And it's like, and in the same vein, right? If Joe Mixon and Damian Pierce do their job, you don't care who the RB3 is. If all the other Astros pitching is healthy, we're not talking about Lance today. Lance would have not pitched, and everybody's like, whatever. But all of Astros Twitter is upset because they could really use premium Lance McCullers right now.
100%. I didn't know if the comparison was valid. And Tom, you're a resident Astros expert, so I just wanted to run it by you. And I know you'll be honest with me. You'll shoot me straight. So thank you for bringing me into the light. I appreciate it. As far as the running back room goes, I mean, yeah, I agree with your assessment. I mean, it's just like RB1 and RB2. RB3 is great to have a good guy for when and if there's an injury so that you can still sustain yourself. A good third down guy, a good role player, if you will, in the depth chart is always nice. But yeah, I don't know if anyone's going to be too concerned if it's Jawar Jordan. I think that between Jawar Jordan and Dario Gambale, it's a tough choice from the fact that it's, do you cut a rookie you just drafted versus do you cut a guy who has been a huge special teams contributor? And I'm glad I don't have to make that decision. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's 4 running backs. So we'll see how the Texans do with that. I think the running back room, the depth showed out and showed up in a way that was really nice to see. Looking at the rest of the offense, the big questions that come up are the big talking points that come up. One is interior offensive line. Juice Scruggs and Kenyon Green played and looked good. Granted, it's against, once again, the backups, but the talk is that they performed really well. What do you make of their performance? Do you think that they played because there was questions as to what they could do, or because of the lack of bodies in the offensive line room to facilitate not playing starters?
No, I absolutely believe they played because they need reps, because they're young guys. Kenyon Green, for all the trials and tribulations, is still incredibly young. Juice Scruggs, this is literally, I guess you could call it year 2, but I mean, did he play it? I mean, he played a fair amount in year 1, but those guys, I feel like those are years you have to like build up those reps on the offensive line. A lot like wide receivers. The first year you kind of chalk it up to learning, and then little by little by little, obviously there's exceptions to every rule, but I feel like, especially in the NFL, there's certain positions, the ones that have the longevity, that I feel like you need time to kind of like perfect that craft. And then once you do, you're Laramie Tunsil, you're, JJ Watt, you're there for 10, 12 years or whatever. And no one ever talks about, the first couple years. So for Kenyon Green, for Juice Scruggs to be able to come in, and they looked good. They look really, really good. Obviously against the Bears twos, but that's what you hope for, right? If you want a guy that's, it'd
be concerning if they didn't.
Exactly right. So for those guys to move people around and open up huge holes for the running game, that's exactly what you wanted to see. And I think for me also, it's to build confidence. Those guys struggled or at different points, or I guess not those guys, but Kenyon Green struggled. So we're trying to build that man back up to the number 1 draft, or a first round draft pick that he was. So any opportunity you can get to play him, I think they should. I think he's got plenty of tread on the tires, so there's no sense in not using him. That's why I kind of like, as much as everybody is very, very convinced by the depth chart that Kamari Lassiter is CB2, I would like to see him, because the reps are, you'd rather him make mistakes now. So I was interested in him not playing. I think Kalen Bullock played, made a great play, made some mistakes, and we got to see him. So the teachable moments were there, and I love that for him.
Yeah, I like seeing the young guys play. I mean, as far as last year goes, I think if he's established himself as the one, as much as it'd be nice to see him in this game, I think we'll see plenty of him the rest of the preseason. But I agree with your point that young guys, especially when their position maybe is in question, it really depends on who you ask. I think that Kenyon Green, if he shows up in the way that we know he should, and the Texans know he should based off of his draft position, there shouldn't be a question of who's starting at left guard. It's just a matter of, can he be that? And anyone who's saying Juice Scruggs had an off season last year doesn't understand that he's built to play center and that he played left guard for the games that he played. And he's a center / guard. He was out of position at left guard. So, I mean, I'll let it slide. The rest of the offensive talking points center around tight end and wide receiver. We briefly touched on wide receiver, but let's get into it. I just want to know, which wide receiver do you think made the most significant impact on their ability to make the roster? And are we making too much of John Mechie's target share?
Initially, I thought so. Initially, I was like, man, this isn't good. I know they went to him on a third down on a quick slant. He dropped the ball. And I think they kind of went away from him a little bit after that. But the more and more I got to wrap my head around it, the more and more I think that's just a play calling thing. I know that Ben Skoranek made a great case to make this team. A lot of people love the fact that he's versatile, but I think he still has to be able to prove that he can go out there and be a solid wide receiver. So I think he pretty much, I don't want to say solidified himself, but he's definitely one of the leaders in the clubhouse, in my opinion. And then obviously, I mean, Xavier Hutchinson was as advertised. I think now he's getting a chance to show that. And I don't know how you cut a guy like that. I mean, the size is there. When you spoke to it a couple episodes back, where this was Brock Purdy's number 1 guy in college, and now we're seeing what he is. So obviously, Xavier Hutchinson isn't a slouch.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Deebo Samuel type could definitely fit a lot of different roles, and had a lot of positive plays last season. I think when that's one where you look at Xavier Hutchinson versus like Robert Woods, and you go, are we going to cut a young guy with a lot of upside for a guy who's been in the league for 11 or 12 years? that's just a really good veteran presence. Like, I don't know. I don't think the Texans are down on Xavier Hutchinson's attitude or his locker room presence. So, like, at the end of the day, I think the choice is a little easier when you pit those two against each other. I agree with you. I think that it's Hutchinson and Skoranek really kind of made their mark. A guy who didn't really show up in the way that maybe he didn't even play. I'm not even really sure, but Quintez Cephas was a guy who I thought maybe is fighting for a roster spot. Didn't really hear a lot about him. Didn't notice his presence on the field. As far as Mechie's target share goes, I'm still not quite convinced that he's even, like, I don't want to say fighting for a roster spot, but I think his roster spot is more certain than people think, just because of, like, once again, we're talking about potential and the fact that he's a great locker room guy. You're getting something from him that you are hoping to get from a veteran. And he's a guy who literally, like, if you understand how cancer treatment works, like, you'd have to understand that the recovery from that and the recovery from his injuries, like, he was never healthy last season. This is his first fully healthy season. And so I think that through the rest of the preseason, we're going to see that John Mechie's a guy who certainly makes this roster. But you can screen record that if you want and post it if he doesn't. I'm giving you a free game for some receipts.
You keep pointing to Robert Woods. The guy that I think is probably the first dude for me as the guy that may not make this roster, and this might be a hot take, it may not, I don't know, is Noah Brown. Like,
my goodness, I knew you were going to say that.
Here's why, but here's why though. Noah Brown's got an injury history. Robert Woods was healthy all last season. If you're going to keep one of them, the best ability is availability.
I mean, Robert Woods did miss a couple games. That was the thing, was that he was acting as CJ Stroud's safety blanket in place of Dalton Schultz, and then he missed a game or two. And then when he came back, Dalton Schultz had kind of picked up the mantle and decided to, do what a tight end is supposed to do for a young quarterback, which I appreciate him for. So I don't think you're entirely off base. I do think that depending on what kind of Texans fan you're talking to, that could be 100% on point, or it could be a hot take. For me, it's a hot take just because I think that Noah Brown, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I just feel like the Texans really like him. What reason do you have to bring him back outside of the fact that you like him on the roster? And I know it was just 2 games, but, like, he has shown high volume potential as long as he's not the main guy. And so on this roster, it's perfect. There's so many wide receivers that he'll never be the main guy. So, I mean, I don't know. I think that might be like a warm take. Maybe. I'm not going to act like it's not something people are thinking about. I think that, I don't want to say it's 50-50. I'd say it's 70-30 Robert Woods versus Noah Brown as to the name that people throw around for not making the roster as it goes. And I don't think it's unfounded. I think that you may be onto something. We'll see how the rest of the preseason plays out. The other position on offense, tight end, you spoke to it. TQ went down. He's going to be out for a few weeks. I saw online, I mean, Cody Stutes, I think, said it best. If the Texans were going to carry 4 tight ends, TQ was going to be the one to push for that. So his injury, I think, severely impacts whether or not the Texans will carry a 4th tight end. How do you feel about that? Do you think that there's another name the Texans could possibly maintain on the roster outside of TQ? Or do you think it's just TQ's injured, so either they're going to keep him in good faith or they're just going to carry 3 tight ends?
I think they're just going to carry 3 tight ends. We've already talked about how many position groups where it's like +1, +1, +1. I don't know that you can afford to keep doing that and have 53. So if you're going to carry somewhere. So if you're going to carry an extra running back, if you're going to carry an extra wide receiver, there's no scenario where you carry an extra tight end. Now, could TQ be on the practice squad? Absolutely. Do I think that another team might go get him? Maybe. There's going to be guys that I believe that are going to get cut off this team that teams are going to be fighting for because the roster is loaded to the depth that it's loaded. And a lot of these guys are going to be better than some guys. I mean, we're talking about a wide receiver getting cut. Any one of those wide receivers getting cut is going to be on another roster. No question. Whether it's Woods, whether it's Brown, whether it's Hutch, I don't even know. I just know that one of those guys is going to be playing somewhere else next year. Or this.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially Hutchinson. I think Hutchinson may be the least likely of them, just based off of his reputation around the league. When we're talking about a Noah Brown or a Robert Woods, those are guys that have produced at this level, at a level that warrants bringing them in, whereas Hutchinson's production is very, like, showing promise. So he's a guy who could pass through waivers, but even then, I don't think he passes through waivers. I think there's a team that's been watching the Texans and is like, we really hope they drop Hutchinson because we're trying to bring him in. Maybe the 49ers are trying to reunite him with Brock Purdy. Like, I don't know, but we'll see. I mean, like I said, I agree with you that the +1 thing can only happen at so many positions before the Texans have to make a cut. And I think tight end is an easy position to be like, yeah, no, gone. I love TQ. I wish that he would have worked out. Just an injury history for him. Like, that was, to me, the quintessential TQ moment was this game where he goes in, gets the first touchdown, and is immediately taken off the field injured. That's just like the story of his career, which is unfortunate because I just really had high hopes for him as the Texans tight end. Looking defensively, we'll go through the defense and then we'll bring this to a close. As we look forward to the Pittsburgh Steelers going up to Pittsburgh to play them for week 1, if you will. I guess I don't know how to define that. Hall of Fame game, week 1. I guess that's what we'll call it. Up in the Steel City. But we'll look at the defense. One of the things that sticks out to me, there was a lot of plays where it looked like the secondary was lost, specifically on the wheel routes going up on that first touchdown the Bears threw. What do you make of that? Is that inexperience? Are we led to be concerned about the depth, or was it just a fluke on those plays? Because it felt like it happened a couple of times where they got behind the defense due to like losing track of players that were supposed to be picked up by the coverage. What do you make of it?
I look at it as safety is definitely a concern because I felt like that was a safety
Simmons
issue.
Got to bring him in.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see exactly how much this offseason where there are those plays, especially in the 2s and 3s. Obviously, I feel really confident about the starters. I don't feel like you're going to have plays like that. But, I mean, it's going to be really interesting if they do have to go to Simmons. Does that up his price? Does he go, I'll sit out a season? I mean, I don't know.
Look at this. Quandre Diggs just signed with the Titans for $5 million.
Mm-hmm.
And now Quandre Diggs, a little older, where the Titans are recreating the Legion of Boom safety room over there in Nashville. And I guarantee both of them are going to at least look washed in the Titans uniforms because that's just the Titan effect. But I think it raises his price. I mean, I think we would pay more for Justin Simmons than the Titans paid for Quandre Diggs, but it does also shrink the market because the Titans were one of the teams rumored to be pursuing Justin Simmons. And so with that, I mean, I don't know. I think $7 or $8 million would be a nice little 1-year signing. That'd be great. I think it's needed. Like you said, with the depth, I think that there's a couple players in that safety room that could afford to maybe go find a job on another NFL team when all is said and done, if that happens. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, as far as that situation goes, I do think it may be inexperience. I mean, we obviously had that play with Kalen Bullock where he forced a fumble, celebrated a little early. A lot of people I agree. It was pretty obvious that fumble should have been covered by the 5 other people that were in the pile. And that ball you do have to be alert, and it's a rookie mistake. I'm glad he made it in the preseason. But I understand it. I mean, I'd be celebrating too if I just forced a fumble and the ball was on the ground and it looked like it was recovered by, I don't know, the 5 bodies that were approaching the 2, players from the other team to recover it. So I have understanding for it, but I do agree that it was a mistake. So there was a lot of youth in the secondary. So that's what I'll sum it up with. Looking at the linebacker room, though, we talked about earlier. Someone actually said this, and I don't know if I disagree with it, but they said Neville Hewitt was the best linebacker the Texans had in terms of showing out in this game. It's a room that has a lot of names in it. Do you know a lot of them? I mean, I could name them. Neville Hewitt, Jake Hansen, Delshon Phillips, Jacob Phillips, and then, I think there's one more name. Maybe I can't name them, but either way. Jamal Hill. There we go. Do you think maybe that there's reason to be concerned with the depth in the linebacker room? And then also, with that in mind, do you think there's reason to believe that the rookie linebacker the Texans just drafted might not make the roster?
The last part, I don't know. That's going to be really tough because you wouldn't want to waste a draft pick, right? You want to be able to, and D'Amico has talked about this over and over again, where I love to get those late draft picks and mold them and create them. And this is his position. So I've said it multiple times, and I will say it again. I will not worry about the linebackers because they're being coached by a linebacker. And he was a very, very good one. And I do believe he creates very, very good linebackers. However, this is probably his toughest task to date. I think he's got a lot of work to do to get these guys in shape. They did not look good. I mean, it was all over the place. And he's got 3 weeks. We'll see what happens. Obviously, the ones are very, very good. So this is to create depth. So we'll just have to really see exactly who makes it out of that group because, man, right now, I couldn't tell you. They were all pretty bad.
It's tough. One last discussion point. We talked extensively about who was going to play, what we were going to see from the cornerback room. Did you like what you saw from the cornerbacks, particularly with Okudah, Henderson, the guys that ended up playing? How do you feel about it?
I mean, it was short lived. I don't think they played more than a couple drives.
No, they didn't play very long.
Yeah. So and I don't know if that was by design. If they really wanted to see, I think it was Ford and somebody else. I can't remember who was on the other side. But I mean, the offense looked really inept from the Bears early on. They were trying to run the football a ton. They really didn't challenge them. So I don't know if you can give a grade because they weren't tested. I didn't like the threes. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just is in line with the theme, like I said at the beginning. That's just like the depth is there for the twos for the most part across the team, but once you get past that, as you would expect, but I think to a deeper degree, the threes are not like amazing. So I guess we'll see. Well, I think that about does it. I think we're about done talking about the Hall of Fame game. The two and a half quarters of football that were played. The weather coming in like that, I think, is so Houston, but maybe that's just me. Andre Johnson, a Hall of Famer now. The Texans are in Canton. What a time. I heard that was the largest crowd for any of the players there, which makes sense. He's the only offensive player inducted this year. And yeah. All right, Tom, do you have anything more to say before we bring this thing to a close?
Congratulate Andre Johnson, man. A great Hall of Fame career. I think he had a great, great ceremony. I even think his bust looks really good. You know, sometimes they kind of screw that up. It was very, very Andre during prime. Andre saw JJ there. He looked great. Hope to see him in Houston sometime, potentially, you know, just kind of hanging around the team a little bit more.
Maybe with the Nico Autry suspension, maybe.
Could absolutely use him for mentorship and leadership, you know, that sort of thing, until he decides to just unretire and become a Texan.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we're following that one closely. We're going to keep an eye on that story. Super excited. I can't wait to see how the Texans decide to approach linebacker and really the defensive depth in general. I'm hopeful to get a Justin Simmons signing sometime either just before or just after week 2 of the preseason. So we'll see how that goes. As always, thanks for watching. I've been James Roy. You can find me at James Roy NFL or at M1 Texans Fan, depending. Coming soon, James Roy PGA. I'm going to make the joke for you, Tom. I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. No, I'm just kidding. And yeah, you can go ahead and hit us up on social media. That's the best way to keep up with the podcast. Tom is at Third Coast Tom on Twitter. And he's also at TCTom1 on Instagram. So you can go ahead and follow him there. It's public. It's not private anymore. So you can follow him and get all of his thoughts. All of his hopes and dreams are just out there in picture and video form for you. And yeah, like I said, that's the best way to keep up with where the podcast is going and what's going on with it. So make sure you follow us. And as always, stay classy, Houston. And vamos Texans. Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast, part of the Fans First Sports Network. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.
Take the handoff. Stroud looking.